It is Easter tomorrow, for those who are not Orthodox Christian. So let me undertake the greatest question that has been left for all of humanity. Did Jesus Christ rise from the dead? I believe Kierkegaard said something like this: the biggest question that has been left for philosophers is the empty tomb of Christ. This has been the question for 2,000 years. Even the Gospel of Matthew he accounts for people questioning the reality of the resurrection, in that accusing people of stealing the body. This has been the question since the Gospels, since forever. Okay, so I've been looking at this issue for years now. I've done no preparation for this video. I just thought to myself, how would I answer the question of, did Jesus rise from the dead? Because as Paul says, if Christ is not risen, our faith is in vain. We all just, as Christians, we're foolish for living this way if Christ is not risen. It is the heart of the Christian faith. If Christ is risen, it means we too can rise from the dead. If Christ is risen, it means we have the Holy Spirit. It means there will be everlasting life. It means we can have communion with God. It means that there is God. The question of, did Jesus Christ rise from the dead, is the greatest question humanity can answer. In today's world, we are in a culture of science, a culture that demands evidence. And personally, I feel that the Christians have fallen victim to this culture because it's equated all truth with science. So at apologetics talks, in all sorts of debate around this topic, it's an argument of pure evidence. So let's look at the evidence. We have the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all written in the 1st century, a few decades after the life of Christ, which in a historical context is very, very early for a life account of anyone in antiquity. Whereas the other famous people of their time would have had people writing about them 200 years later, maybe 1 or 2 documents. Whereas Christ has the 4 Gospels, he has all the letters of Paul, the letters of Peter, the letters of James, the letter of Jude, the book of Revelation, all the books of the New Testament. All these people attesting to the Christ as Jesus, the Messiah, and the Son of God, from God, God himself, God in the flesh. The 4 Gospels are where we get the life of Jesus, where we get all his teachings. Matthew is, according to church tradition, seen as the first Gospel, where he writes how Jesus fulfilled the prophecies. We have Mark's Gospel, which most scholars have to kind of date it first because of all sorts of biases in scholarship and such like that. But I personally think Matthew came first, but let's say Mark was first. That's the shortest Gospel. It's kind of bare bones according to church tradition. It's essentially what Peter experienced with Christ. And then it presents a very brief account of the resurrection. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke present a similar narrative from different perspectives. Mark is writing on Peter's behalf. So Peter's account essentially. Matthew would have been writing as a first-hand account. Luke was one of the evangelists with Paul. He was a historian. He would have learned from the first century Christians and gathered up a cohesive narrative on Christ. And John is the beloved John, personally knew Christ. And the Gospel of John would have been either written by John himself or John, who would have taught his disciples, and they would have written on his behalf. But it's John's Gospel. And John is where we get the divinity of Christ explained and elaborated on. Something that is neglected to mention is Paul's letters coming much, much, much earlier than the Gospels, because the church was established before we had Gospels. They weren't just men that got together and wrote Gospels and then a church kind of happened. The church existed. Paul was preaching. Peter was preaching. The church was existing. There were churches set up everywhere. There were evangelists spreading the message, prophets, all things like this, until it became bishops and more formalized churches. But the church existed before these Gospels. And we had Paul writing, for example, in 1 Corinthians 15, mentions a creed, a very early Christian creed of, this is Christ rose from the dead. He appeared to Cephas, which is Peter. He appeared to 500 people. He appeared to this, James. And then finally, he appears to me, as in Paul. This is an early Christian creed. This would have been within about 5 years of the original, like the resurrection. Because Paul would have been writing that in 40 to 55 AD or something like that. And if he's writing this creed in a letter to the Corinthians, he's basically reiterating what the Christian faith has been from the beginning. This is what he received. Paul says this is what he received. As in, he went and met up with Peter. He met up with the apostles after Christ appeared to him. This is what he received from them. This is what Christianity had always been. So this notion of a developed narrative of this wise teacher, and then his followers sort of started to call him God and the Messiah. This is what the early Christians, the people who lived and walked and suffered with Christ, this is what they preached. So Paul is a great source of knowledge on what the Christians had been believing. And then you have Peter and James's letters all coherently preaching the same message. Now the Gospels are where we actually get the narrative. We get the teachings of Christ, and then we get the resurrection accounts. So what I was saying before, we've, as Christians, fallen victim to this evidence sort of culture. So I've presented you the evidence, but what happens is Christianity gets equated with evidence. Here is evidence, therefore believe. And it forgets the moral teachings of Christ, and it forgets the necessity of faith. Because when you read a gospel, you read first, here is this Messiah predicted by the prophets in typology and in direct prophecy. Typology as in something mirroring the Old Testament, not... this is another misunderstanding where, for example, David will be speaking about something in his context, it may be referring to himself or to another king or whatever. Typology is when it happens in his time, but it's fulfilled in Christ. So this is like John Chrysostom, a very early church father, he understood it like this. The scriptures aren't prophecies in like, I see this Jesus doing exactly this, and then it will happen like that, and it will be fulfilled like that. It's often typology. It's Christ is the fulfillment of what came before. So there were practices, there were things that happened before. Christ makes sense of all of those things. Not that those things were directly talking about it, although there are definitely passages that would have directly been referring to a Messiah. But there's direct messianic prophecies, and there's also the types, to make that clear. But on the resurrection accounts, on the Gospels present the depth of Christ's teachings and how it surpasses anything that's ever been taught before, and how everything is fulfilled in love. Christ is love. Love your neighbor, love God, and treat people with this utter goodwill. Be willing to sacrifice for them. Be willing to go the extra mile. We can't forget this aspect of the gospel. We cannot just focus on the end at the resurrection and then present that evidence. We need to look at what the gospels are teaching. Here is this Christ. Here is how he died. And here is the resurrection. Mark's gospel, for example, brushes over the resurrection. It leaves it as an absurdity, as in, it leaves it as up to the reader. How are you going to confront this? Look at this Jesus. Look at how he fulfills the prophets. Look at the way he taught. Look at the love that he preached. No one lives like this. Only someone from God. Look at how he was willing to suffer for us. And he kept saying he's going to suffer for us. And he must suffer for us. And he's willing to suffer for us because he loves us. And then we must confront the question, did he rise from the dead? Was he really who he claimed to be? And anyone can just claim to be God. Anyone can just say, yeah, I'm going to rise from the dead. But the Gospels are making it clear. Look at how this person conducts himself. Who could do this? Who could do this? And Mark's Gospel says he rose from the dead. He visited people. And he gave the last message, spread the gospel. Matthew's Gospel, more in depth, but the same thing. Look at how he died. Look at how the world went crazy after he died. He visited people. They were in awe. The end of the story. John's Gospel shows how people were unbelieving. They still doubted. People doubted. That's going to be a part of it. Even if you were there and saw Christ, you were still going to doubt. So this notion that we can, if we just saw Christ, or if we just had this miracle happen in front of us, we would automatically believe, that is not the case. So purely treating it as the Gospels as just presenting some evidence that you need to decipher with, that is not what the Gospels are doing. That is what I'm against. So there is evidence for the resurrection, and you can show, oh, here's an account, here's an account, here's an account, here's an account. Oh, and then you have Paul's letters, also an account. Oh, there's evidence of an empty tomb. Oh, there's evidence of these people genuinely believing it. They wrote and preached about it, and then also that they were willing to die for it. And they genuinely believed it. So the evidence usually goes like this. The best hypothesis is that Christ really was risen. And then the secularists would be like, no, of course someone can't rise from the dead. But Jesus existed, Jesus was crucified. His body was sort of missing. So the disciples had to have some sort of mass psychosis or delusion. Or Peter had so much guilt for turning from Christ that he had a delusion that Christ had risen from the dead. And Paul also seemed to have this delusion, and James also seemed to have this delusion, and all these people just had this delusion, and that's how the church started. That's usually the best sort of secularist answer you get, or the answer that, oh, Christ was this really wise teacher. He just happened to claim to be God as well. He thought he was the Son of God. Like Bart Ehrman will admit this. But, he actually wasn't. He died, and he was probably just wrong about himself. Or his disciples were just crazy and started calling him God. So it's when you look at the evidence, it's difficult to make sense of Christianity as even if you're not a Christian, let's say you're an agnostic, like someone like Alex O'Connor, and you're looking at the resurrection evidence, it doesn't make sense. Like Alex O'Connor will admit, he's been looking at the question forever. It's like, why would these people lie for this? Why? What was Christ? Was he just this wise teacher? Why did people start calling him God? None of it really makes sense. Why would Paul, who was killing Christians, suddenly start believing the Christians? That was supposedly crazy. So the evidence isn't conclusive for the agnostic and the atheist, but it leaves them confused. What happened on that Sunday morning? What happened? And most non-believers are sort of fine with saying, oh, I don't really know. They were probably just crazy religious people. Or they deluded themselves like other sort of cults. And they tend to just are happy to move on from it. But the reason why Alex O'Connor keeps dealing with Christianity, I'm using him as an example because I actually admire his work quite a lot. The point I'm making is what happened on that Sunday morning and with the early church is strange, doesn't make sense. And the evidence can really point to a real resurrection. Why was there no evidence of a body? Why was there an empty tomb? Why are there so many accounts of the same thing? Why were these people willing to die for it? And why did they all genuinely believe it? But that's the evidence that we get presented with. But when you just treat it like that, you are forgetting who Christ was and what he preached. We cannot just present it as a scientific project. We lay it out on the table, here's the evidence. The Gospels are presenting a particular message. And it's meant to transform you, not turn you into a scientist. It's meant to impact you. It's meant to change the way you see other people. It's meant to change the way you see the world. Love your enemy. Do good to those who hate you. Blessed are those who are persecuted for my sake. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are the humble, essentially. That is these core teachings of Christ. Love your enemy, love your neighbor, love God with all your heart. You have to reframe the way you see the world. That is what the gospel is presenting, what Jesus is teaching. And then he's saying, I'm not just going to teach this. I am going to walk to the worst possible death. People, you guys are going to betray me, some of you. And yet I'm still going to do this because I love you so much. And then the question, did he rise from the dead? So the point I'm making is this is not just an evidence project. The evidence is there, the evidence is confusing, and the evidence leaves you with this question. Who is Jesus, and is he really who he claimed to be? And C.S. Lewis puts it so beautifully in Mere Christianity. There wasn't an option to call him a wise teacher. And he's got this famous liar, lunatic, or Lord. Either Jesus was this immense Machiavellian manipulator convincing his audience. But then why would he go and die for this? And why was his teaching so remarkable and impacting? And then was he a lunatic? Okay, sure, some homeless man can preach some really good things and you'd be like, wow, amazing. But was he deranged? I mean, you can come to that conclusion yourself. Read the teachings of Jesus. Tell me if you think he's a lunatic or not. But the point is, we cannot be calling him this wise teacher. He didn't leave us with that option. He said, I am the Son of God. I am the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven in Daniel 7, who receives all the kingdom and all the glory for those who follow me. Christ said, pick up your cross. Follow me daily. Be willing to walk to your death. Be crucified as I've been crucified. Be willing to lose everything. Sell all your possessions for the kingdom of heaven. Be willing to lose everything. We cannot forget this aspect of Christ. So C.S. Lewis is saying, he's either this liar, this lunatic, or he's Lord. And we have all his disciples, all of them, dying brutally, maybe except for the Apostle John, who died in exile on an island. But the gospel presents Christ first, what Christ was willing to do and what Christ preached, and then it presents this resurrection. We need to look at the full picture. What is the gospel telling us? It's not just wanting an evidence argument. It's not just saying, can we sort of figure out if this man walked out of the tomb? Did his body really sort of regenerate? You know, that's how we're being pulled into this battle of evidence. The gospel is trying to transform the hearts of every person that reads it. And the question of resurrection is a question of, am I going to trust who Jesus said he was? And in the transformation of coming to see the world the way Christ did, maybe then you will believe that there's really resurrection. There is evidence. I'm not denying the evidence. And I'm also not denying the fact that people can be skeptical of it. I'm not saying it's conclusive by any means. But we cannot forget the full picture of the gospel. One can agree with all the evidence and not be in Christ. One can have studied the case for Christ, looked at all these lawyers and all these historians that have sort of concluded it's the best conclusion, that this man really did rise from the dead and his disciples were telling the truth and they died for it. But if it doesn't transform you, if it doesn't impact your heart, if it doesn't make you love your enemy, if it doesn't make you pure in heart, that you can see God, then we're wasting our time. And resurrection will not be a reality for you. So do not forget what the gospel is preaching. And faith, that word it's so stigmatized. But what it means is, are you willing to trust that this life of Christ is the way to live? Trust. That is a better word for people these days. To put your trust into Christ. If the faith is enough, if the evidence is enough for you, if the preachings of Christ is enough for you, if this way of life is really the truth is not just the evidence laid out on the table, but the truth is Christ himself, the way, the truth, the life. Are you willing to live the life that Christ lived? Do you see this life that he lived is truly divine? Is there any better way to live than Christ? Tell me. I'd love to know. Tell me. I can't see it. Did he rise from the dead? You decide.